Hi, Scott Cunningham here with your 6th video in the Arc Pro X and Arc Max video training series. In this video we're going to be discussing manual cuts. So a manual cut is simply moving to the edge of a piece, firing the torch manually, and jogging across it in order to cut it off. You don't necessarily have to just jog across it. You could go down and essentially trace around a part you've already cut out. Very handy for dealing with plate where you've cut a small section and you just want to cut out that scrap of the skeleton and leave the solid plate so you can save the small section you have left without having the rest of the skeleton be left. So the first thing you need to determine when you are doing a manual cut is how fast do you need to travel. Okay, so down here is your jog speed slider. This controls how fast you jog. Okay, so when you jog, the speed you're moving is shown up here under the feed rate. So I'm currently moving 150 inches a minute. So I need to know how fast should I cut this piece of 16 gauge based on what kind of tips I have in and what kind of amperage I'm cutting with. Well, I am cutting at 45 amps with a fine cut tip. If I reference the manual for my plasma cutter and look at fine cut tips, 45 amps, 16 gauge, I will see that it has a feed rate of 250 inches a minute. So I can cut this up to 250 inches a minute. So right now I'm moving 150 inches a minute. It's too slow. Okay. So what I want to do is adjust my jog speed. Now, if I were cutting 1/4 inch, this would be a lot different. I'd have to have different tips in, and I would have to cut at a much slower speed. Okay. So if I go up, so let's say try 44%, that's 264 inches a minute. I'm close. Make a little adjustment. 234, a little too far. 252, ooh, darn close. I don't want to go faster than 250. I'd prefer to go a little bit less. So 240, that is absolutely perfect for making this manual cut. So now that I've set my feed rate to make my cut, there's two ways I can make a cut. One, I can do it with torch height control on. And that's a great way to do it because then I don't have to worry about waviness in my plate causing my torch to not move correctly or to get too close to the plate. This is especially important if you're cutting across an entire sheet because there will be variation in the height of the plate. And so particularly with the fine cuts, if you allow your torch to get too close to the material and it touches that material, it can trash your nozzle very quickly. So the next thing you'd want to do is set up your torch height control volts. What are your preset volts? Well, we've been running this 16 gauge with this fine cut, so our preset volts are already set at 79. If I looked at the manual for my Hypertherm under fine cut 45 amp, I would see 79 volts as my preset. So if I was cutting a different material, I'd have to reference the manual to find out what the correct voltage is. Okay, so my 79 volts is preset. So basically, I've taken care of my voltage. I've taken care of my feed rate. So now all I'm going to simply do is jog my machine so I'm half on, half off the plate. Okay, and I want to set my Z-axis roughly an 1/8 inch above the plate. Okay, it can vary because we're just kind of cutting right across the plate on this, trying to sever it essentially. Okay, so two things to keep in mind here. I'm right off the edge of the plate. So to do a manual cut, I would actually click on the torch on button and start jogging once the machine has fired. Okay, now it's important that I not be too far off to the left. If I'm too far off and I hit the torch on button and I don't get a arc OK signal, the machine will not allow me to jog. Okay. One way to eliminate some of that is to hit the disable hold button. That prevents the machine from holding for the arc OK signal. However, the plasma, if it doesn't get an arc right away, it can turn off very quickly, and so it may not keep the pilot arc on long enough for you to actually get to the material. So I recommend you be as careful as possible about setting up your actual position so that you're as close to the edge of the part as possible. And hitting disable hold is not a bad idea, but you'll want to make sure you turn this off when you're done. Okay, it's very important. So I've lined up. I'm the right height above the plate. I have the right jog speed, and I have the right preset volts. My torch height control is on. It's on auto. I can turn it on, and that way it will adjust. If I left it off, it would stay off. Okay, because I'm not running any code, so nothing's going to tell it to turn on. Okay, so if I leave my torch height control on, I'm in the right position, the right feed rate with the right voltage. I'm going to click on the torch on button. Oh, I'm too far from the edge, essentially. I wasn't able to, so it attempted to cycle, but it would, so I moved my torch over just a little bit, and now we're going to retry it. Okay, so this time I'm closer to the edge, and I know that I'll get ignition of the arc when I hit the on button. So I cut across my part, and now I want to hit torch off, and I can jog back over the plate to stop the splashing. Okay? So that's the basics on doing a manual cut. The big thing is always make sure you are right on the edge of the part so that you can cut it off, and so that you get the actual torch to fire, essentially. So manual cut steps: determine the correct jog speed for this material with this tip, with that what amperage you're set to. Determine the correct feedback voltage so that your torch height control is set up right. Or you can turn your torch height control off, but for longer cuts, leaving this on is a really nice, very important, essentially. You don't have to worry about your torch running into the plate. And then make sure that you're close enough to the edge of the plate to allow the arc to fire. And that's all you need to know for running a manual cut.